Thank you for joining me on my inaugural episode of my Horror Sexuals podcast, where horror movies are a lot like sex or pizza. Even when they're bad, they're still pretty good. You'll hear oftentimes in your life that there are going to be certain moments you'll always remember, like the first time you lost your virginity or the day of your wedding. There will always be moments that will stick with you forever. And I don't remember much about any of those particular events I just mentioned, but I do know I remember the day that I fell in love with horror. And here is that story. While it may seem daunting, I do have to take us all the way back to 1984, when there was a little film that was released entitled A Nightmare on Elm Street. My family had purchased a VCR. And again, you have to remember this was the mid-80s, and the rise of the mom and pop video store was happening, and it was coming through the medium of the VCR, because now you could take movies that you saw in the theater and you could place them right in the middle of your living room. You could even hit pause and go to the bathroom and get yourself a snack and come back and hit play again. You could even watch it and then wait till the next day and watch it again. So the VCR was a very coveted electronic in our home because it allowed us to be able to watch movies. And my sisters were approximately 10 years older than I was. And so obviously I did a lot of watching of cartoons, and they had a smattering of other things they watched. For those of you who lived or were alive during that time and can remember, it was one of the VCRs that was like a square box, and it weighed like 200 pounds, and you would press a button and the top would pop up and you'd slide a VHS into it and push down the top and hit your play button. Didn't have a remote. You had to get off the couch and go down to it to fast forward or rewind. Now you have to remember, back in the 80s, when a movie came out in the theater, it would be there for a couple months and then it would disappear. And then randomly 3 to 4 months later, it would show up on VHS at a video store. And Nightmare on Elm Street was no exception to that rule. So actually it would have been 1985, and I was 6 years old, and my sisters rented A Nightmare on Elm Street. So being the youngest in the family and having my sisters with a 10-year gap in age, oftentimes I was kind of left to my own devices, like go play in your room or go play outside, and I was by myself, so it was boring. So I was always trying to get into trouble or up to things I shouldn't be up to. And so the night that my sisters rented A Nightmare on Elm Street on VHS from the video store, I was curious what was going on. Now, I don't remember anybody telling me I couldn't watch it, but I feel like it was made known somehow that I wasn't supposed to be bothering my sisters, or they were going to be doing something and I needed to go play or do something else. And it was nighttime at this point, and so my sisters popped the movie in. They were in our family room where we had the VCR, and our family room was quite big. They started the movie, and while it was completely dark, I quietly slid into the back of the family room and sat on this old steamer trunk that my mom had. And I was very quiet because I knew I wasn't supposed to be in there bothering my sisters. At the time, I didn't realize it was about a scary movie. I just knew I wasn't supposed to be in there. But I was really quiet, and there are parts that I can remember specifically as the movie starts and Freddy's putting together his glove before they do the title card. I can remember thinking, well, this isn't Care Bears. And I continued to watch with amazement because it was so different. And I didn't feel scared, I was just extremely intrigued. And the moment that Freddy flexes his hand once he puts his glove together and turns it around, and then the title card comes zooming forward at the audience, I just can remember feeling a very visceral feeling of just intrigue and wanting to. I was just kind of like, okay, I'm totally. What is this? Like, this seems so different than any of the other, stuff I watched. Of course, I'm 6 years old. I'm typically watching things like the Smurfs and He-Man and Care Bears. Not Freddy Krueger, but that was getting ready to change. The defining moment for me really came when Nancy falls asleep in English class and she sees Tina in the body bag and she starts to follow the trail of blood. When she gets down into the boiler room, there is a frame where we can see a light in the distance back behind the boilers. It sort of gives off a yellowish, sort of golden color. I can remember, I can visually remember in my mind seeing Freddy step out from behind the boilers with that physicality that Robert Englund can bring to Freddy. And it was sort of just that silhouette that has become famous. Nancy says to him, "Who are you?" For me, that was exactly what I wanted to know. I guess that moment created a unity with me because, see, we had seen Freddy prior during Tina's death and when he chased her through the alley, but there wasn't any kind of conversation. It was just this scary guy chasing this girl. So why I don't remember that part is beyond me, but for some reason I made the connection at that moment where Nancy says, "Who are you?" And at that moment, I became a Fred head. I'm totally not even kidding. Like, I sat silent the entire time watching the film because I had to find out how it went. And I didn't feel frightened because we were in our living room. My sisters were there. It was like the comfort of our own home. And it just, in my mind, I knew it was just make-believe. It was a fantasy. It wasn't real. And I don't know why at 6 years old it was so simple for me to do that, because nowadays, you hear about people like, "Oh, you can't watch that movie, you're too young." And I'm like, when I was that age, girl, I was like all about that life. I'm like, okay, I'm here for it. I mean, girl, it was apparent that scary movies were going to be my kink when I grew up. So after the night that I watched it with my sisters, I put it in the next day when no one was around, and I had to watch it again because I just, again, was so enamored with it. I 6 years old, I was a total Fred head, and was able to, I remember sitting probably like 10 feet from the TV this time because I didn't have to hide that I was in the room. I connected to it like fish to water, and I had no idea what was getting ready to come because I truly believe that was the moment that I fell in love with horror. So at this point, everything is totally smooth because I sort of kept it on the DL. That was, of course, until Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 rolled around, which became a little bit of a different story with me and my mother. And by different story, I mean I fought the law and the law won. So now that you know about the day I fell in love with horror, I'm going to finish our trip down Elm Street by regaling you with that fantastic story in my next episode. So for all you horror sexuals out there, please make sure to join me for that exciting conclusion of what it was like to have been born on Elm Street. To be continued.